Well, if you turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 17, we'll cover the rest of this chapter this morning. And it's unfortunate, those who couldn't make it this morning, because this is going to be a good one. This is the story of David and Goliath. All those folks who came last week aren't getting the rest of the story. Well, we'll have to just send it to them, or you'll tell it to them, however it comes by. But this is a pretty famous story, so we probably all know how it goes, right? But nevertheless, we're going to go through it, and we are going to be blessed by what the Lord has to tell us. Well, as you are turning, you're probably already there because you're good Bible scholars. But as if you are still turning there, to recap last week, we covered Goliath, the giant, who, if you saw in the cycling Q&A, ouch, poor Phoebe. If you saw the cycling, Goliath was a giant from Gath. He was the Gittite, and he was the taunting Leviathan. He is described as a serpent in his scales, and he is the one whom David has come and vowed to challenge, and he does this to the dismay of his eldest brother Eliab, and that is where we were left off. And so, from there, we will read. If you please stand, if you're able, for the reading of God's Word. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 31 to the end of the chapter. Then the words which David spoke were heard, and they told them to Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Then Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant was shepherding his father's sheep, and a lion and a bear would come and take a lamb from the flock, and I would go out after it and strike it and rescue the lamb from its mouth. Then it rose up against me, and I would seize it by its beard and strike it down and put it to death. Your servant has struck down both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has reproached the battle lines of the living God." And David said, "Yahweh, who delivered me from the hand of the lion and from the hand of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and may Yahweh be with you." Then Saul clothed David with his robes, and put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with armor. And David girded his sword over his armor, and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. So David said to Saul, "I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them." And David took them off. Then he took his stick in his hand, and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had, even in his pouch. And his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. And the Philistine came on, and drew near to David, with the shield-bearer in front of him. And the Philistine looked and saw David, and he despised him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, with a handsome appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine also said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of Yahweh of hosts, the God of the battle lines of Israel, whom you have reproached. This day Yahweh will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. I will give the dead bodies of the camp of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that Yahweh does not save by sword or by spear, for the battle is Yahweh's, and he will give you into our hands. Then it happened when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David sent his hand down into his bag, and took from it a stone, and slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead, so that he fell on his face to the ground. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and put him to death, but there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and put him to death and cut off his head with it. Then the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, so they fled. But the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the slain Philistines lay fallen along the way to Sha'araim, even to Gath and Ekron. Then the sons of Israel returned from hotly pursuing the Philistines and plundered their camps. And David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his weapons in his tent. Now when Saul saw David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is this young man?" And Abner said, "By your life, O king, I do not know." And the king said, "You inquire whose son the youth is." So when David returned from striking down the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head in his hand. And Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant, Jesse the Bethlehemite." May the Lord bless the reading of his word. You may be seated. Phoebe really likes this story. She was reading along there. Did you hear it? We begin opening here with the words which David spoke were heard, and they told them to Saul, and he went for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Then Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant was shepherding his father's sheep, and a lion and a bear would come and take a lamb from the flock. And I would go after it and strike it and rescue the lamb from its mouth. Then rose up against me, and I would seize it by its beard and strike it down and put it to death. Your servant has struck down both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has reproached the battle lines of the living God." We open with Saul summoning David. He's caused quite the commotion, right? Not just his brother is dismayed, but there are multiple people saying to David, "Yeah, if you kill this Goliath, you'll get the king's daughter. But also, David, you're ridiculous. You're not going to be the one who's going to go out there and kill Goliath. That's silly." So all this commotion is coming, and so Saul says, "All right, summon David to me." Remember, David's not a nobody to Saul. He is Saul's armor bearer at this point. So he hears the commotion of David in the camp, and he calls David to him. And so David says, "Look, Saul, I'll take care of this Goliath." And he isn't really concerned so much, as you see. He's not so much concerned about the gifts that he will receive here. He's more concerned about the heart. Let no man's heart fall on account of this Philistine. He's concerned about the reproach that this Philistine has brought to Israel. But what is Saul's response? "David, don't be silly. You cannot handle this Goliath." I mean, have you seen this guy? He's tall. He's big. He's so big he has this shield bearer, and even that guy is little compared to him. He's a big guy. You cannot handle Goliath. Beloved, we are in a generation full of Sauls. And I think every generation has to deal with a previous crop of Sauls. These men who are paralyzed by practicality. "Oh, that's real clever of you there, David, but have you seen what you're dealing with?" Trust me, I've been dealing with this for a long time, David. You can't just go out there and kill him. That's ridiculous. How many times have you heard, maybe not that exact turn of phrase, but that kind of idea? Oh, young Christian man with zeal and heart for his country and for his nation, you can't do that. I've been here for a while. I know how this works. I've been harping on them, so why not harp on them another week in a row? Conservatives. Good, well-meaning, I think, in many ways, but they're Saul-like. They're paralyzed by practicality. Two examples from this past week that I've seen. One was a fellow who astutely observed in a debate with another conservative, asking, "You, my older generation, what have you conserved? I have grown up with you as the conservatives, and what has been conserved? Children being mutilated. That's what has been conserved. That's what you have achieved." Another example was a pastor online getting upset at another pastor online. You love to see that, the disunity that comes through online discourse. Is saying, this pastor is necessarily calling for insurrection because he believes that we should ban all other religions. Well, you can't possibly do that because your Christians are a minority vote in the country. So you must be calling for an insurrection. That was the claim. Is that not just a Saul-like item? Is that not just a Saul-like turn of phrase? You can't handle a Christian nation. You can't handle a reformation. You can't do it. I've lived it. You can't do it. But beloved, it is merely a projection. It's a projection of their own inability, their own experience of faithlessness. Saul says, David, you can't handle this because he assumes David is as faithless as he is. Because Saul has been against the Philistines before, and he has failed time and time again. Now, he's defeated his enemy, but he has failed. And God has had to make up all the difference. And so Saul thinks, this David, he's come, he's young. He was young like I was once young. And he probably thinks this is his Nahash, which he is. And he thinks he's just going to be able to deal with this all simple like. But I know the world. And I've been fighting these Philistines for years. And I know that there is no rest with them. And that this will be a constant war. You cannot win. Again, this is the voice of mainstream Christendom today. We've been fighting the culture war for 40, 50, 60 years, some of them. And they have been fighting, and I'm not taking that away from them. But because they have seen loss, and they have not seen victory, they assume upon us that we must necessarily see loss ourselves. Do not listen to the voice of the Sauls. They are paralyzed by practicality. You can't do that. That's not how it works, they say. But God is doing something, and He is always doing something. We must make sure most Christians, good Christians, theologically are not deists. They believe that God was wholly interactive and constantly active in history, right? And that's what we read in the Scripture. But for some of us Christians, we've become, in a sense, practical deists. So when the New Testament finished, God kind of said, all right, I'm just going to wait until my son comes back. But otherwise, I'm sort of taking a stand back on history. You guys sort of do whatever you want. Let it degenerate. Let it get better sometimes. But you do whatever you want. I'll just sit here and I'll wait on my clock. And the alarm clock will go, oh, it's time. All right, Jesus, go back. That's how some people view history. And I think it's a bit of a deistic view. That God has become, in the new creation, the clockmaker who's set the clock and he's saying it run. But no, beloved, He is active in history and He does new things all the time. He does new things all the time. The Reformation was a new thing. And He changed how things were done in history. Don't now get stuck there. Don't get stuck. You can think of the teachings of Jesus here, right? Old wineskins. Don't get stuck in the old wineskins. There are new wineskins. All right. David answers. All right, Saul, you think I can't do it? Well, let me tell you something. I've fought with lions and bears. All right, who does this remind us of? Anyone in particular? Fighting lions before fighting Philistines? Samson. That's right, Samson. So he's fighting lions. He is saying, Saul, He's probably not saying it as explicitly as this. This might be a little too vain to put it this way. But I'm like Samson. I've dealt with these lions. I've dealt with these bears. But if you pay attention to how David describes them, one might be given to wonder, is he actually describing lions and bears? They have beards, and they have hands. They don't have paws, and they have beards. Now, maybe with a lion, you could say, all right, it's got the mane, right? Or the bear, and just saying, I don't really think of bears and beards necessarily. But I think that's the point. I'm not saying that he is talking about men, but he is comparing the Philistines. He is comparing the lawless man to these animals, and vice versa, the animals to these lawless men, such that they have hands, such that they have beards. And this will be picked up on in the prophets, right? Specifically Daniel. How are the nations described? As beasts, right? Terrifying beasts. Lions and bears are one nation is a bear, right? And it isn't Russia. It's not Russia. He has dealt with the beasts of the nations, as it were, and now he must face off against the serpent of the abyss. But David says, now Saul, I did not defeat these beasts, these lions, these bears. I did not defeat them in common manner, as you are supposing must be done with Goliath. But how did this happen? How was I able to take down this lion? How was I able to take down these bears who are attacking my sheep? The Lord, Jehovah, Yahweh, He is my deliverance. He is the one who will deliver us from the beasts. And so Saul says, all right, fair enough. I wish, I just was describing our Saul-likes today. I wish our Saul-likes were like that. All right, yeah, sure, okay, go ahead. But they're not often like that, are they? They're sort of stuck in that first part. So Saul says, all right, go ahead. Here's my armor. Now, this should be picked up on in our ears, right? Wait a minute. Saul is putting armor on David? What is this a picture of? We've got a complete reversal here. David's supposed to be Saul's armor bearer, right? Now Saul is the armor bearer to David. Saul, without really even realizing it should seem, is already submitting himself to David as a king. But this whole situation is a rather silly situation, as we'll read, and I think has often been depicted in media. This scene is a little silly. But the silliness comes in this. I'll describe it first. It would be as if we took Brother Logan's clothes and said, let's put it on Brother Charlie. All right? See, I didn't say Jacob. All right? But we'd all look at that and go, wait a minute. That's not going to work out, right? And if I could give another example is, sometimes I think, well, the difference between the small and large is just 2 sizes, right? So it shouldn't be that bad. And this happened at a USF game where they give out shirts and, not jerseys, but shirts and whatnot. And sometimes there's no smalls and there's no extra large. All you got is sort of the middle bit, is the larges. So I said, all right, I'll grab one. And then you put it on and you go, oh, wow, that's actually enormous. I mean, there is a big difference between those 2 letters. And so that's the silliness of it. It's a 6'3" guy giving his clothes to a guy who's like 5'4", 5'6", right? There's a silliness there. There's a silliness, and we would all recognize, and yet they go through with it, right? It's not as if it's Logan taking the clothes and saying, okay, put this on, and then they hold it and go, no, I don't think it's going to fit. No, he goes through the whole effort. He puts it on. He puts on the coat, and he lets it sort of hang there, and the helmet is sort of like this, right? He looks like Frankie when Robert gives him one of his hats, where it's just covering his eyes and he can't see anything, right? It's silly. It's silly. But I think part of putting it on is for that intended purpose. Look how silly this is. This is the armor of man. Saul is clothing David in the armor of man. And what we are learning Even as we learned in the previous bit of this chapter, right? Saul is the giant of Israel. He's supposed to be the one going out to fight Goliath. And what does he have here? He gives him a bronze helmet. So he has a bronze helmet to meet Goliath's bronze, who is the only one with iron weapon and iron spear in Israel. Saul. Who else has the iron spear? It is Goliath. And so here is the giants. They're supposed to be fighting, but what has happened? The king who was called to be like the nations cannot overcome the nations. Saul's armor cannot overcome Goliath's armor. There's a stalemate. There is no movement. So the power of crippled institutions is useless against the beasts. And so we must consider the silliness of vain garments. Again, I come back to some of my examples that I mentioned, where conservatives who have totally dropped the ball, right, in the past 30, 40 years are telling us, no, young Christian man, this is how you fight the culture war. This is how you do it. And sometimes you have to take a beating. And by taking a beating, they mean just constantly lose. There was a comment years and years ago. I can't quite put the time on the date, but I remember it came, I believe it was from a former senator, he's passed away now, John McCain, who was talking about Republicans, we have to go for a 2-point conversion. That's how we, win the game, right? And the point was, a commentator made was, you have to make a touchdown first, right? That is a true right to you, because I don't really know how football works, so maybe the commentator's wrong on that. But as I understand it, that's true. You have to make the touchdown before you go for a 2-point conversion. You can't go for a 2-point conversion if the other side is always getting the touchdown. And you certainly aren't winning the game that way. As it happens, it's 6 points, and 6 is a greater number than 2. The silliness of these vain garments, and yet they clothe us. They clothe us in it and say, no, you must go out and fight Goliath in this manner. But David answers thus. David girded his sword over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. So David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. And David took them off. Then he took a stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had, even in his pouch, and his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. He puts off David's armor and puts on, as it were, the Lord's armor. We should hear echoes of this in the New Testament, where Paul says, take off the old garment and put on the garment of Christ. That is what David's doing here. And so he gathers 5 stones. Why does he gather 5 stones? Well, there's 5 giants. There's 5 giants. Now, he's not actually going to end up using these stones on the other giants. He does use it on Goliath. The other 4 giants are killed by Israel. Israel goes out and kills the other 4 giants on behalf of David, which shows if one guy kills one giant, then the people can learn to all kill giants together. So there's 5 giants, but I would also suggest to you there are 5 cities. Right? There's 5 cities of Philistia. So the Pentapolis is being dealt with here. Now, why does he use stones? Why does he use stones? Well, first of all, what is he doing? He's out Benjamiting the Benjamite, isn't he? Saul's a Benjamite, and who are the guys who are known for slinging slings? Benjamin. Right? At the end of the book of Judges, we find those left-handed assassins, that's my right hand, and I'm left-handed, shooting their stones and being devastating. It is until the Lord goes on to the side of Israel that Benjamin is defeated. So here David is taking on the sling of Benjamin, which would probably make sense just from a historical, practical point of view, right? If David is Saul's armor bearer, he probably learned the arts of war from Saul, at least a smidge. And so he is bringing that. But more to the point, these 5 stones. What has Goliath been doing? He has been blaspheming God. He has been blaspheming Israel. So what is the punishment for blasphemy? Stoning. So he's come out to stone this giant. And a last point here, as we will see throughout this text, and I've brought this up before as we started with the story of David, and I want us to keep remembering it, especially as we get deeper and deeper into his story, that David is a story, in a sense, of the coming together of the twins. Jacob and Esau are found united in David. Right? His description is like the description of Esau, and we will see him act kind of like Esau later on in 2 Samuel. But in many ways, he is also like Jacob. It is so on the nose, I think, in Scripture that there's one character that David comes across who is named Nabal, which is the reverse in the Hebrew as well, the reverse of Laban. All right? So it's very on the nose there. But here we are already seeing a little bit of David as Jacob in this text. How so? He's a shepherd boy, we see, as Jacob was the shepherd compared to his brother Esau, who was the hunter. And Jacob is known for setting up what? 5 stone altars. And what else is Jacob known for? For Esau was a hairy man, but Jacob was a smooth man. That's distinguishing the 2 Jacobs, our Jacob and the Jacob of the Bible, right? He grabs them from the brook. Brooks and streams are very often related to the Holy Spirit. I'm not going to go too deep on that point. I'll just say for all of you, good Bible scholars, put a little mental note for yourself somewhere on that. There are many brooks related to the kingdom period, and the Spirit is often associated with it. Therefore, there may be something there to be gleaned, but I'm not going to go too deep into it because it might be a little too speculative for a Sunday morning sermon. But he has with him his staff. Now this is a little bit better. We can glean a little deeper on this one. It's a little bit clearer of an image. First of all, it's a shepherd's crook, right? But this staff should remind us of Moses's and Aaron's staff, which did what in Exodus 7? The staff consumed serpents. And so now David's staff is going to consume a serpent. And so he goes out to battle. The Philistine came on and drew near to David with the shield bearer in front of him. And the Philistine looked and saw David, and he despised him, for he was but a youth and ruddy, with a handsome appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine also said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field." And David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of Yahweh Sabaoth, the God of the battle lines of Israel, whom you have reproached. This day Yahweh will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the camp of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that Yahweh does not save by sword or by spear. For the battle is Yahweh's, and he will give you into our hands." So Goliath and David exchange, before anything else, they exchange verbal blows. But even before the verbal blows begin, Goliath looks at David and he despises him. He despises him. This should remind us of the earlier point in the book where there was an odious smell. Now we have an odious visage of the righteous to the wicked. We are a stumbling block, if we are righteous, to the wicked. Goliath hates his youthfulness, his handsomeness, and his ruddiness. Again, an Esauic man. He looks and he hates. Why? Because beauty is hated by the wicked. One does not have to be an excellent, scholar or expert on art to see how art has degenerated, right? The beauty of the Renaissance, the beauty of Reformation art, even down, further past those periods. The classical arts, the beauty of the statues and architecture, Gothic and all the rest of it, and now today, in which we build things based on utilitarian purposes, right? Roger Scruton once said of a place that was run down, graffitied, and all the rest of it, he said, "No wonder no one wants to live here. It's so darned ugly." There's a truth to that. Nobody wants to live in an ugly place. Nobody loves ugliness. But the wicked love ugliness. I know that sounds like a contradiction of what I just said there. But it's a Gollum kind of love. It's a self-love and hatred. They love it because it hides how ugly they are. They don't want to acknowledge how ugly they are in their sin, so let's make everything else ugly. We can't have beautiful things because if we say there are beautiful things, then we're confessing there are ugly things. And if I'm ugly, I don't want to be identified with that. So let's make everything ugly and then call it beautiful. And that's how we will do it. Thus, Goliath hates the beauty of David. Thus, as Christ's own beauty was despised and mocked. And therefore Goliath says, "Am I a dog?" Well, yes, as a matter of fact, you are. You're a hunted beast. Remember how Peter refers to the Jews in his second epistle. They are like dogs being hunted down, right? The apostate, the false Israelite, of which the Philistines represent throughout this book, the false Israelite are beasts. They are hunted down by powers of God. He is distraught by this Goliath, and thus he curses David by his gods. And thus we see the battlefield, the battle lines formed. Yes, there is here Goliath, and yes, there is here David, but there is something else beyond. And no, I'm not just referring to those arrangements of men, of Philistine soldiers and Israelite soldiers behind the two men. I am saying there is something spiritual at play here. Goliath has brought Dagon with him. Which is going to be funny, because what's going to happen to Dagon? He is going to have Goliath. He's going to have the exact same fate as Dagon, right? Fallen prostrate on his face, eating dust. But both evoke the curse of the covenant, right? The birds of the sky, that should remind us of what? Revelation, right? The feast of the bridegroom, where these birds, and we're going to eat the flesh of commanders and all the rest of it. Robert knows that passage well, because for my best man speech at his wedding, that's what I read. I read to a full audience, totally unprepared. And then the saints of God will eat the flesh of men. And, that was a good way to start the best man speech. I haven't changed much, have I? They've brought the curse of covenant against each other. And so, now, because they've said practically the same thing to each other, the question is, it's an Elijah question. The God who is there, the God who is true, the God who is living, let him answer by fire. And God will answer for his people. The Lord is David's sword. Now you understand my comment earlier about be thou my vision, right? Where I was sort of muttering on. The Lord is David's sword. He has named his name, just the Lord's name. Just Jehovah, just Yahweh, and beloved this morning, just Jesus, is a more powerful weapon than any weapon of men. The name of Jesus is more powerful than all the nuclear weapons combined. I don't know if that would actually do anything, but if they all came together and you blew them up all together, Jesus is a more powerful weapon than all that. Not because we have to be careful here. There are some well-meaning Christians, brothers and sisters, that kind of use Jesus' name as a magic word, right? Jesus this, Jesus that, right? And if you go out into Africa, missionaries have pointed this out, he is a magic word. It's just a charm, right? It's Jesus bless you, 1655 oranges, right? Like that's how they use it. It's a charm to bring in good business. It's a charm to bring in good luck. That's how Jesus is presented over there. So I'm not saying it's a magic word as if you just say Jesus and everything goes away. What I'm saying is the power of the name of Jesus is this is how God responds to us. He hears his son's name and he answers. And he is glad to answer by his son's name. Jesus taught as much, right? Ask of anything in my name. The Father will give it to you, right? If you're in a crowd of people and you have a common name, which I didn't think was that common, but apparently maybe here in Brooksville, or we just keep coming across the same guy. Logan is a common name. So that when someone else calls out, Logan, what does Logan do? He looks, right? He looks. The same kind of idea is here presented to us. When we say Jesus, and in faith by the Spirit, God looks. He hears. Remember, that's how the story started. God hearing little Hannah praying. Remember, this whole story is just an entire play on this word, right? Of hearing, God hearing. Saul is the heard one. Samuel is the one heard by God, right? So, hearing is all present here. Jesus' name is more powerful than any weapon. So let us exalt his name. Let us glorify his name. Let us glorify him. If we worship him rightly, we will defeat every enemy of his. And this is his promise. The Lord of peace shall soon crush Satan under your feet. Your feet. When Paul wrote that, he was saying that to a local church. Your feet, local church. Christ will crush Satan. We have here also a contrast between David and Goliath. Goliath comes out with this shield bearer, but where is David's shield bearer? Well, the Lord is David's shield bearer, and thus he is a picture not only of Jacob, but also of Abraham. For what does it say in Genesis, right? Genesis 15, the Lord shall be your shield. And so, with that, the Lord is ready, David is ready, Goliath is ready, Dagon's ready. So let us see how it pans out. It happened when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David sent his hand down into his bag and took from it a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and put him to death, but there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and put him to death and cut off his head with it. And the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, so they fled. But the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the valley and to the gates of Ekron, and the slain Philistines lay fallen along the way to Sha'araim, even to Gath and Ekron. And the sons of Israel returned from hotly pursuing the Philistines and plundered their camps. And David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his weapons in his tent. All right. David hastily defeats Goliath. There isn't this long-waited battle as might have been presumed. Again, the paralysis of the old guard, they're waiting and they're going, well, this is going to take a long time. This is never going to be resolved. We've been dealing with this our whole life. And then David comes and we're done. Right? It's over. The Philistines are fleeing. They're gone. The serpent's head is crushed by what? A rock. Right? This is the picture. The cornerstone, the rock, destroys the wicked. So Christ did to apostate Israel. He said the cornerstone that was rejected, right, will come back and will destroy you. And as I said earlier, Goliath has become like David. His face is on the ground, right? He hits his face on the ground. He's eating dust. Like the serpent is cursed with eating dust. But then David goes, all right, I promised I was going to cut this guy's head off, so I better make good on my word. I don't have a sword. All right, well, I'll go take his, right? Goes and takes his. Goliath's head is cut off by his own sword. The apostate tools destroy apostates. This is the picture of all of history, really. When the Philistines flee and break their promises like serpents, and we'll see how Saul follows in manner in the following chapter, what happens? They go and plunder, right? They inherit the treasures of the wicked. They gather, or rather the wicked gather, collect, and then what do? They give away to the Christians, whether they like it or not. That's just how it plans out, right? Plays out. God promised that. He promised it in the Beatitudes, right? Blessed are the meek, for they shall what? Inherit. Inherit is the important word there, right? Inherit the earth, right? They are going to receive it as a gift being passed down, right? And we see a similar kind of inheritance play on in the Proverbs, right? We all know, probably, that proverb that says, a good man gives an inheritance to his children, right? But what's the second half of that proverb? And the wicked store up treasures for the righteous. That is one proverb together. We see a picture of that. I won't go too long into that because our text doesn't really get that deep into it. But just an example here, a biblical example. We see that in the story of Cain, right? Cain builds and makes all this stuff through his sons, right? His lineage creates all this stuff and invents all these things. But who does all that stuff belong to? To Cain's seed? No, because they all die in the flood, right? It belongs to Noah's, the good seed. We now benefit from musical instruments, from agriculture and things like that. Who invented it? Who gathered? Who collected? Who figured that stuff out? The Cainites. Who gets to reap the benefits of it? Us, the Christians, right? Now there is a point here, and there seems to be a dischronology. And so if you're dealing with a unbeliever, and they say, the chronology doesn't make sense in this chapter. Do you know what your answer should always be? Should always be this. I don't know, but I know you're wrong. All right? Because there is an answer, and there's over 2,000 years of this, and you can't really expect, and we're going to get deeper into it with the rest of the verses. Actually, why don't I read that, and then I'll go deeper into this point. It says, Now when Saul saw David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this young man? And Abner said, By your life, O king, I do not know. The king said, You inquire whose son the youth is. So when David returned from striking down the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head in his hand. And Saul said to him, Whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of the servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. All right, so there's been numerous ways of explaining this text. I think most of them are kind of convoluted, to be honest with you, even among the conservative side of reading the text. I think it's very simple. But what they'll say is, well, you see, this must be two different stories. And actually they say that chapter 17 starts a different story from chapter 16. And they're saying there's these two different David stories and they've been compiled together, and that's what's happening here. And then they say there's actually a third one, and that's that last little text. Because what? Saul knew who David was at the beginning of our passage just this morning, right? He said, David, come to me, and he's giving him his armor and stuff. So how is it that he comes to the end of the passage and he goes, who's this David guy? Right? Now the question, and I think I sent this to some of the folks in the congregation. I sent one of this guy. It's a little YouTube short. Explain how Genesis 4 and Genesis 5 are written by two different people because they disagree with each other. How can it be that the ancestor of all these things that created all these things in Cain's line perished in the flood? Ergo, these are two different stories. The guy in Genesis 4 didn't know the flood was going to happen. Genesis 5, the guy does know that the flood was going to happen. It's just stupid, all right? I think I saw Robert word that when I said, what do you say to them? You're stupid? Yeah, kind of. Yeah, that's the idea. They don't know what they're talking about. You really think that when they came to compile the Bible together, whoever they were, even if you go with this JDEP kind of idea, that they couldn't discern between 10 verses? That these two stories contradict each other? That's not what's happening. They just lack the ability to read. Yeah, that's the issue. They lack reading comprehension. That's the issue. No, this is a really simple, easy thing. All right, so first of all, one, the Bible is not concerned with chronology like we're concerned with chronology. The Bible is concerned with telling a story and giving its points. All right? The points are what the Bible is concerned about. So when it says that David brought the head of Goliath to Jerusalem, and we find out later that they have to go and take Jerusalem from the Jebusites, that it is probably not referring to literally right after the fact that he brought the head to Jerusalem. The point is, that's where the head ends up. Why is he telling us this now? Because it's important to the story. It's important to the story to know that David brings the head of Goliath to Jerusalem. Why? Because it is Golgotha, the hill of the skull. Golgotha, Goliath. There's an etymology there. And I'll just leave it at that. If you have further questions, you can ask Dean about that. But there's the Mount of the Skull, right? Or the Hill of the Skull. Whose skull? Goliath's skull. Why? Because David brought the head there. All right? That's important. So it's not a chronology issue. It's more of a story issue, a narrative issue. It's giving us the story. Second, why does Saul act like he doesn't know who David is? Because you're missing the point of the story. You're missing the point of the story. What Saul is saying, and I think it is as clear as day, given how this plays out and how David is a Jacobic kind of character throughout this story, is who is this David? And there's a difference between who's David and who is this David. All right? And I'm not saying that the text necessarily words it in that way, that it's worded differently, but that is clearly the intent of this passage. Because Saul does know who David is. And he probably knows who the father is too, because he already asked about that. But now, he probably forgot about it, because why does he need to remember this? All he says to David is, go tell your dad that you're my son now, right? That's all he said at the previous chapter. He doesn't really care about who David's dad is. But now he does. Why does he have to care? Because of the promise, right? You will be free in the land. Well, who needs to be free? David's family. So he needs to know who the father is, right? It's really not that hard. We'll be real honest with you. It's the same kind of silly hermeneutics that reads Genesis 1 and 2 and go, well, see, Adam had a wife before Eve, because it mentions that a man and woman was made in Genesis 1, and then in Genesis 2, a woman has to be made again. Yeah, you know who else is made in Genesis 2 again? Adam. It's really not that hard. We just lack very simple reading comprehension. All right, who is this David? What is the family status of this David? David, the picture of the story, the point of this ending to the story is this. David has now replaced Saul in what? He's the asked for one. Bring this David. Who is this David? David is now the asked for one. Saul was supposed to be the asked for one. And what happened when Saul was asked for? We should have known how this was going to play out, right? Because when Saul was asked for, where's Saul? They go looking around, there he is, hiding in the baggage, right? But when David is called, he comes. He comes. Now, Abner is ignorant. And this is pointed out. Abner starts to become a character more and more from here, but Abner is ignorant. Why is that important? Because Abner, who is, we read earlier, is the chief general for Saul, doesn't even know who David comes from. And who's David? Saul's armor bearer. It's a military position, right? So the general should probably know who the closest military ally of Saul is, and he doesn't. Old guard is failing to see their faithful replacement. As I said, there are examples or reasonings for how Saul doesn't remember these things. Some point out, and this is more the conservative line of thinking. This is your more prominent rendering of the text. And I'd say it's probable. I mean, if you really feel like you have to give an explanation for this text, then you can go with this. But I just don't think it's necessary, and the text reads fine on its own. But it's this, that Saul, if you recall, is a demoniac. He's insane, right? He might not remember these things left and right because he's haunted and terrorized by a spirit constantly. So if that's what you want to go with, you are welcome to. I just don't think it's necessary for the text. What is this important thing. I'm David. I'm David, the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. Again, this should remind us of Jacob. Jacob wrestled with that terrible foe, the angel of Yahweh, and he prevailed. And what was the ending of that story? I'm Jacob. No, you're Israel now. There's a confession. There's a confession. And so David identifies himself and confesses that he is the twins united. Jacob and Esau united in him, so that his name is David, which means what? Beloved. He is the beloved. He is the bridegroom. He is the bridegroom. We'll pick up more on that later, but I'm exceeding my time a little bit here and having too much fun, so can't have that. We'll end with this. You will note that Goliath's name has disappeared from the text at this point. Now it's just the head of the Philistine. The Philistine. Goliath is not there. Why is Goliath not named here? One, his name's blotted out. He's dead. But two, Goliath is or was Philistia. Right? That's the intent of this. He said he is the Philistine. He is the champion. And so he represents the whole of Philistia. So what is Philistia now? A headless corpse. And who has made Philistia a headless corpse? David. David has. The Philistines are not going to be a trouble again until when? David is on their side. All right? David has Philistia's head in his hand. David has slain his Goliath, his giant of the Philistines. But he will come to find out defeating a giant of Israel is a little bit harder than defeating a giant of Philistia. Saul is going to take a lot longer to deal with. And he is going to have to trust the Lord through the shadow of the valley of death. Our applications this morning. First, pursue the Lord's deliverance even when everyone else has been paralyzed by fear. I can't stress this enough. We are dealing with generations of imposed paralysis, telling you this is the way it must be done. This is how it has always been done. And by always, they mean since about 1940 something. All right? That's what they mean by always. Don't be paralyzed by that. Don't be paralyzed by their fear. The names they call you. The threats they're scared of. Don't you know that if you pursue this, you'll end up like that? So be it. So be it. If it means Christ's name is honored. Call me whatever name you wish. Let Christ's name be honored. Second, reject the tools of weak souls and embrace the faith of the Lord which slays giants. Now, this is not to say be an insurrectionist or go outside of the institution. God demonstrates, especially in this book, how he subverts institutions, how he gets into these institutions with his people, and then he favors his people, and his people take over those institutions. So I'm not suggesting remotely any kind of seditious actions whatsoever. But we must reject, as we enter into those institutions, the tools of those institutions. Because they're useless. We've seen how useless they are. I remind you of that quote. What have you conserved? Child mutilation. There's no truer words than that of a condemnation upon our current day and age. That is what we have managed to conserve. Full-blown degeneracy. Do not use the tools of the weak souls. And lastly, you could read this. Kill the dragon, get the girl, right? Kill the giant leviathans and plunder their riches, for yours, Christian, yours is the kingdom of heaven. So we don't take the Saul's tools, but we do take the Goliaths. And David's going to go walk around, kind of, I imagine, with a great deal of swagger, just walk around with this massive sword that belonged to Goliath later on, right? Yeah, that belongs to you. AI is spooky right now, right? I can't be the only one that goes, oh man, this is kind of scary what it can do. But you know, that belongs to you. Yeah, the pagans are going to go crazy with it, and it's not going to be very fun in their hands. But when the time comes, the Lord's going to hand that off to us. You know that? Pagans go crazy with the printing press, but in time, and paper and ink, but you know, in time, we're going to get our Bibles. And the internet is crazy and degenerate and ugly, but you know what? How many of us, raise of hands, listen to Christian podcasts weekly? I have one good listener, all right? All right, how many do it daily? All right, there you go. All right, see? All right, the power, it's been given to us. And as someone on a live stream once, years ago I listened to, once said, he said, think about the wonders of the fact that here I am, I'm not doing the accent, but here I am in Australia, and I'm connecting with you in America at the same time, and we're communicating to each other at the same time to worship God. Think about how amazing that is. Yeah, the internet's ugly, and it's gross. But it belongs to us, as with everything that is created by the hands of man, belong to us. And so, as the printing press killed their giants, so the internet will kill our giants, and AI will probably kill, I don't know whose giants. Maybe our children's children or something. I don't know. We're moving pretty quick on the technology scale. Maybe AI will just turn out to be kind of nothing, like the Segway. It's like, oh, it's kind of neat. It makes funny videos of Will Smith eating spaghetti, but that's about it. So we'll see how it plays out. But either way, it belongs to us. It belongs to us to make funny videos of Will Smith eating spaghetti, not the pagan. All right? Let's go to the Lord in prayer.